Hey, Browns fans, Spencer German, Cole McDaniel with you. We know it's been a late night, so we don't want to take too much of your time here as you probably get yourselves ready for bed. And there's not a ton to react to from a Browns lens anyway. But night one of the NFL draft in the books, we kind of figured it would be a quiet one for the Browns. They kind of told us that in their own, in not so many words, Andrew Berry last week, and that ended up being the case. They kind of stayed put. Although I will say, Cole, when the Bills were making that trade at 32, the thought did cross my mind. Like, what if the Browns are just trying to swing something to get back up in there? But obviously, we know they didn't. They stay put. I want to react just to some of what we saw tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about maybe what's on the table for the Browns tomorrow in day two. But first things first, Cole, biggest surprises, and I say surprises, plural, because I think we all know what the biggest surprise of the night was, but what were some other things that surprised you on top of the obvious one you're going to go with, I think, here first?
Yeah, the obvious is Michael Penix to the Falcons, which funny enough in my mock draft, my 7-rounder that I did, I had the Minnesota Vikings trading up to pick 8 with the Falcons to take Michael Penix. So it was the same spot he was selected. It was just the Falcons who took him. But, I mean, he's going to have the opportunity to sit behind Kirk Cousins.
You had him ahead of McCarthy, didn't you, Penix?
Yeah, is my evaluations. I did think that McCarthy would get selected by the Giants 2 picks ahead of Penix, but I do think Penix is the better player. But it's a good pick for the Falcons, despite being surprising, because Cousins is their guy now for 2 years. Penix gets to sit behind him and really maybe get more time to develop and be ready to go. Obviously, Kirk Cousins was injured last year, so if for some reason he goes down, I think Penix is NFL ready to step in immediately. So it really does help give them an insurance policy for a team that has a chance to maybe win a very weak division. So that was the most surprising thing. I have to say, obviously, the draft didn't end that long ago for us, a late night here. But I think the Bills continuing to trade back multiple times and just not choosing to take a wide receiver completely threw me off because they need wide receiver bad. Their best guy's Curtis Samuel right now at slot. They need a big X receiver on the outside. I thought they could have taken a swing at Keon Coleman, at Adonai Mitchell, but instead they kept trading back. Sure, they got more assets, but why not just pull the trigger? They're going to be first up on the clock, when the second round starts. But I thought that was interesting that they were trading back. I think there weren't many trades until
the Vikings were the only ones.
The very last stretch. It was basically the Minnesota Vikings traded twice, and then finally some other teams started to trade. I think that was probably the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah, and I was talking to some friends of mine. I'm originally from Western New York, so I have some connections up there, just some people who I text with, friends, whatever, who are Bills fans. And I actually ended up kind of walking away feeling like the Bills trades towards the end of the draft there sort of stole the show. I mean, I know like the Penix pick is going to be a big talking point for people, but I thought them making some of those moves late and trading out a couple times sort of stole the show, especially when one of the trades that you made was for the Chiefs to come up and get a wide receiver. And what's the team that they haven't been able to get over the hump against in the playoffs is the Chiefs. So I'm sure that'll go over well in Western New York if Xavier Worthy's making big time plays in the playoffs to take down the Bills here in the coming years. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing I wanted to hit on in a quiet night for the Browns, of course, is just what the rest of the division did tonight. So pick 18, all 3 teams in the AFC North staying with their original picks that they had tonight. So you had the Bengals taking Amarius Mims out of Georgia, and the big thing with him, obviously, is that he didn't give up a single sack during his career at Georgia, which I limited, I guess, snaps in comparison to some other offenses in college. But because Georgia's offense isn't built that way, but it's still a pretty impressive feat for them. A couple picks later, you had the Steelers taking Troy Fautanu from Washington, the really talented tackle, who was another highly graded offensive lineman in this class. And then you rounded it out, pick 30, Wiggins, who fell to them because of just how the defensive prospects fell tonight. What did you think about those 3 picks and what the Browns' biggest rivals did in the draft in night one?
I have to say, and obviously we'll touch on the Browns a little bit more here in a moment, but I think you have to feel good about, I don't think any of the other 3 teams did anything very eye-opening, because you look at the Bengals pick, and we can start with Amarius Mims. I think he's a very solid right tackle. Obviously, anytime they're trying to get an offensive lineman to protect Joe Burrow, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
quarterback. But I guess maybe the thinking for the Bengals is if an offensive tackle is 330 pounds or larger, because Orlando Brown Jr., he's a big guy at left tackle. They brought in Trent Brown, who's another massive right tackle. I would think that Mims is probably going to be Brown's backup initially and get a little bit of time to develop. Sure, it's good to have that depth, but he's not going to probably make an immediate impact on that roster unless they decide to kick somebody inside to guard, which I don't see them doing. So it makes sense protecting Burrow, but it doesn't impact the team immediately. Also, then you have the Steelers. You mentioned Troy Fautanu. He plays left tackle at Washington. I wasn't as high on him as others. I thought he should have been more of a second round guy, even though a lot were mocking.
I also think he's more of a guard. His arm length isn't quite what you want for a tackle, and just watching his tape, he seems to do. He seems better suited for an interior offensive line position, in my opinion.
I agree. He's very aggressive, and I thought at times he kind of overcommit, sometimes get off balance. He has a lot of good ability in the run game. But I don't think left tackle is built for him in the NFL. Now, what I expect to almost happen with them, they're set at the guard positions. They still need a center, but what's probably going to happen is Dan Moore should be gone at left tackle. You're probably going to see Broderick Jones, who they recently drafted. He's probably going to bounce over to the left side from right tackle. Fatanu's then going to probably be the right tackle because he's the better run blocker compared to Jones. So Fatanu will probably be that right tackle because they don't really need a guard right now as much as they need a tackle. So you're going to see a reshuffle on their line. It's not going to be a perfect fit immediately. It's going to take a little bit of work syncing as a group, but that's what I would at least expect there. So those two touched on offensive line, and then we look at the Ravens, and it was eye-opening for me and intriguing because when I think Baltimore Ravens, I think big, fast, physical, hard-hitting defense, right?
Yeah.
Nate Wiggins he's a tall, lean, long corner. And when I say lean, he's like $173 at times, right? At his playing weight in college. He has the straight line speed. He can get in the trail position and disrupt passes. But if he's up against a big bodied receiver, even a guy who's not massive, but is a veteran like Amari Cooper, I think Amari Cooper can throw him around at the next level. He's got to put weight on. He's got to put muscle on. He's not what I expected from the Baltimore Ravens. So nothing for me was an eye opener for the Browns. Not necessarily scared of what any of the other teams did in round one.
Yeah, I don't think it was anything eye popping like you mentioned. Wiggins was interesting too because the Ravens secondary is still going to be really, really good. Like that's an area they didn't lose a lot this offseason, and a team that's obviously trying to kind of retool in some certain spots. You lose Patrick Queen, you lose some other guys. Jadeveon Clowney's not coming back. So I thought it was interesting that they kind of went corner. But I mean, it's a defensive-minded franchise, defensive-minded team, so I kind of understood it in that right as well. But yeah, I don't think you're looking and saying like, oh no, they really gained a lot of ground on us, or they're really scary now. So I think that's probably some good news for Browns fans and the Browns as a whole. But obviously some I think solid pick for those franchises, but nothing that worries you too much. Now going into tomorrow, and we'll kind of wrap on this thought. Yeah. We obviously have thrown a ton of names out. We did in our draft preview yesterday. And all those names obviously very much still available when you're picking at 54. It's the Michael Halls. It's, you mentioned Trey Benson. It's maybe Malachi Corley. It's some of these other guys that have been kind of thrown out there, Chris Jenkins Jr. What, given though how the board is kind of played out here, defense was clearly not a priority for a lot of these teams. First player didn't come off the board until 15. So there's still some value in terms of defensive players that you can get now early second round, and maybe more guys fall closer to where the Browns are going to pick. Are you still sort of leaning in your purview a guy like Trey Benson at 54? Or do you think the math has maybe changed on some of this going into day two?
Yeah, I think that the first round probably went about as ideal as you want for the Cleveland Browns, because we made a list of like 10, 11 guys that we expected them to potentially pick in rounds 2 and 3. Every single one of those names is still available at this point. So yeah. They all had visits. They all are guys that are highly linked to the Browns. So I think Cleveland has to feel really good about what their board looks like. I think with the way things are falling, right? Defense really slid because it was all about the offensive guys in that first half of the first round. I think because of that, the farther defensive guys slide, and sure, there's been some picked in that latter stage of the first round, the more those guys slide, the better chance you might have at getting a second round talent in the third round on the defensive side. So could a guy like Michael Hall Jr., as other defensive tackles drop down, could he actually be available in the third round when most were expecting him to not be by the third round pick? So I think the more that offensive guys go, the more you need to probably focus on a Trey Benson, or, if you like a Malachi Corley, or if they're really sold on Ladd McConkey or Troy Franklin, right? If those guys are available, you probably go offense then in the second round, depending upon how the start of the second round shapes up, and then focus on defense in the third, because clearly defensive guys are sliding.
Yeah, and I think for fans that maybe really want a wide receiver, given that some of these guys fell tonight and are still going to kind of be on the board going into tomorrow, if you really like a Ladd McConkey, for example, or we've thrown out Malachi Corley a couple times, Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, that's another guy that visited with the Browns. If you're riding that wide receiver train, and that's something that you want to see the Browns do, to your point, Cole, like, because the offensive players seem to be so coveted in this draft, maybe that's something the Browns make a play for, or that they got their eyes on, because a guy like Michael Hall could still, different Buckeye, could still be there, obviously, in round 3. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Guys, we want to encourage you and implore you to continue following along with all things Cleveland Browns right here at the Browns Digest YouTube channel. We had our preview yesterday. We're doing this little hit with you guys tonight. We'll have another hit tomorrow after round 2 and 3 of the draft, where we'll sort of recap everything that went down, and I'll be in Berea talking to you guys. And then Saturday, we'll obviously do the same thing. So a lot of good stuff still to come. And, of course, I already have an article up at si.com/NFL/Browns from tonight, just talking about what Cole and I mentioned here, what the other teams in the AFC North did tonight. So we appreciate you staying locked in. We'll be here all weekend long. You know where to find us, Browns Digest YouTube page, and over at si.com/NFL/Browns. Have a good night.